their careers, such as the perspectives from early career ocean professionals who are in our working group. We discussed various methodologies and identified which of these can promote wide use of best practices and how we can address the limitations. We also learned about existing tools, platforms, resources, and we looked at how we can utilize them. And yesterday, there were also some areas or ideas for collaboration following this workshop, after this workshop. And then we also considered the use of OBPS for collaboration, consensus building, and innovation. And we discussed about how it can reach across various user groups and include in the process non-scientific groups, practitioners, and other stakeholders, including those who are underrepresented, such as the indigenous communities and the use of traditional knowledge. So just to go, sorry, let me, okay. So just to go through with the first of the discussion highlights, we explored on what do we currently know about what trainings and capacity development programs were there. And we learned about the preliminary results from the OBPS survey, trying to map all these initiatives. And there were gaps that were identified with existing EOBs, such as the SSH, transient tracer, particulate matter, DOM, DOC, etc. We also explored on the perspectives of ECOPs on their training needs and how the OBPS can contribute to that. We had discussions on BPs on managing data, fit for purpose BPs, support on citing DOI and access to science communicators and digital designers, and making available model data sets for each EOB to help people practice handling data. I think we have Alexis here. We had a good discussion yesterday from our ECOPS colleagues. Alexis, would you like to expound more on this point? Did we cover the discussion so far?
I think so. One of the things we talked about is that a lot of people, so I'm working, I'd say, mostly with ECOPS and outside of, the US and Europe in places that are maybe lesser resourced. And there's a lot of feeling of overwhelm in looking at best practices. Like, how am I, I'm just getting started. Maybe my lab isn't very well equipped. How am I going to approach this best practice? And so we talked about, at least within the OA community, which is the one that I work the most with, we're looking at the concept of a decision tree whereby someone can say, okay, this is what the capabilities of my lab are, and therefore these are the types of scientific questions I can answer. These are the limitations of my data. These are, this is what I can answer and this is what I can't answer with this type of information. And within the OA community, we've been calling those kind of practical best practices. So lower cost best practices that kind of address some of the both issues in terms of distribution of resources, but also the feeling of some people being a bit overwhelmed looking at maybe the best practice, which might not be attainable based on the equipment that they have access to. Is that, Johanna, sort of what you wanted me to cover?
Yes, yeah, that's it. That's a good point. And later on, I think in some part of the highlights, we're going to go back to that point on people getting overwhelmed with all these best practices, and also going back to your to your important contribution yesterday on the practical best practices. So I think that later on in the discussion we can go back to that, but just to confirm that we were able to capture this needs that were identified during our discussion. Is there any other ECOPS participants from ECOP group who would like to share their views on this? Okay, so moving ahead, the second area that we discuss is on methodologies. Well, quite contrary with the main findings of the survey, of the OBPS survey, that 70%, about 70% of training employ face-to-face methodology, there seems to be changing preference clearly towards online courses, perhaps due to the cost and accessibility, and also given the current environment with this COVID pandemic. Well, of course, although there are limitations, especially that not all contents can be replicated online, and as I think it was Federico and Danilo who also highlighted the point that the pedagogical principles are, making hands-on training more effective in knowledge transfer are not present when you do this online courses. It seems like what seemed to be ideal is this hybrid blended approach. But if the onboard component of that is not possible, there were also some discussion on the potential of virtual reality filling in this gap. Actually, yesterday we also had this discussion on virtual reality, and there is like the participants agree that it's not clear whether this VR is effective enough. And so one of the recommendations for the OBPS that we reached is to create the best practices for on compendium on the subject of virtual reality. There was also a discussion on fit for purpose VPs and practical best practices. Again, going back to, I think, what Alexis mentioned earlier. Like when people get overwhelmed, especially those who are new in the field, and laying different methods and how the data that comes from it could mean or be applied, and highlighting the techniques, quality control, even cost efficiency would be would be useful, would be addressed if there are like decision trees, flowchart template, or cheat sheets that are made available, and this led to our recommendation on developing a toolkit that can help people identify entry points depending on their purpose or their data requirements or resources available, etc. So that's what Alexis, that's the discussion on practical best practices that your organization is actually implementing. Is that right? Would you like to talk about more on this training program with your organization?
Sure. So I work at the Ocean Foundation. I don't know if I know everybody on the line. And we're a community foundation based in Washington, D.C. I'm based in Seattle. And one of our primary programs is our Ocean Acidification Initiative, which is really about building capacity of scientists and policymakers, and it's really about removing barriers and kind of increasing equitable distribution of capacity. And so we've worked really closely with this scientific kind of body of Go On to say, okay, how can we fill these big monitoring gaps and really provide access to carbonate data to places where a $30,000 automated alkalinity system is just simply never going to fly, or you're never going to be able to send sensors back for calibration every year because the cost is simply too high from this place. So that's where it was really a group effort with Go On, with members from IOC, and with the IAEA OA Coordination Center based in Monaco. And the tagline, practical best practices, was actually not mine. It's Lena Hansen, who was with the IAEA OA ICC, sorry for all the acronyms. And one of the things that came out of that was something called Go On in a Box, which is basically a suite of equipment designed to be lower cost, but still get you data that's acceptable, within the Go On framework. And so, my efforts focus really on distribution of that equipment around the world, training, providing in-person and remote training, and financial support for scientists. But I think and the people who've designed these methods include Andrew Dixon designed the alkalinity, titration that's used in this system, right? So we used really the experts in the field designed what they viewed as a sufficient but much lower cost version of what they might be doing. And a lot of times that was just taking out automation and making things a bit more manual, lowers the cost dramatically. And so we've deployed these, and we're really interested in writing all of this up as sort of a manual, including, like I mentioned, the decision tree, to summarize how and where you can begin and what equipment you might use. And we also are incorporating biological experimentation as part of that decision tree. Johanna, I don't know if there's anything else you wanted me to add, but that's sort of a brief summary of the program.
Right, but I think one interesting point as well there is addressing this challenge of lack of equipment in developing countries. And what I understood is that this program, your program, while utilizing best practices, works on this challenge by providing equipment to the developing countries. Is that right?
So we get our funding primarily from like overseas development assistance sources, right? So the Department of State in the US, the government of Sweden, and it's very much a development program. And we basically then work with our partners to design. I have one-on-one session with each recipient lab and design their kit, but it's based on a common framework. And then I order all the parts. I handle all the shipping and customs clearance processes, get the equipment to them, provide them a stipend to support their time using that equipment, and then ongoing mentoring. I'm still in touch with people who got a kit 4 years ago. I have been emailing back and forth yesterday with someone. So it's a long-term commitment to the success of these folks.
Right, and that also has an element of like a mentoring program, right? It's like
so Go On has something called the peer-to-peer network. Again, this was not created by me, just really there's a lot of partners involved in this, but PIER to PEER, it's sort of a pun. And basically it's more senior scientists who have a lot of experience in this topic area paired with either early career or just people who are new to this field. And we try and pair people based on general discipline and research interest. So when it comes to our kit, so that's for anyone who wants to participate. When it comes to our kit recipients, we ensure that they have a mentor assigned to them, and then we have some specific guidance about working between mentor and mentees. So for example, with data quality and kind of ensuring that, your data is really ready to submit to a repository. That's something that we ask people to work with their mentor on.
Can I just ask a question about that?
Yes, please, Sophie.
Is most of that work between the mentor and the mentee remote, so email, whatever, conference calls, without having in-person visits?
Yeah, so it's mostly remote. However, there's actually, we offer something called the peer-to-peer scholarship that we reserve a portion of our funding for basically like an open call for applications for $5,000 grants for collaboration between mentors and mentees. And that's not just our kit recipients, it's really anyone in the program. And people, we basically like to fund people where there's going to be some improvement in the capacity of the mentee in a realistic way. So we don't accept applications where it's like, my mentee is going to see my state-of-the-art lab and learn so much, because it's not relevant to them back home. But for example, we funded projects where like Denis Perot from AOML went to Argentina to help a woman, Carla Berghoff, actually set up her underway system and make sure it was working and make sure everything was sort of up to snuff before she began her cruises with it. And then she also visited his lab to get a little bit more training in certain techniques. So that's the type of stuff that we support. Now that it's no travel is going to happen, some of our scholarship recipients are focusing more on collaborative research, where they're in their individual labs, maybe shipping samples and using remote technologies to collaborate.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
Any other question? Because I think that this is really a good initiative. I mean, it's a good way. The training program that you're designing is really good in a way, because it's really trying to address the challenges of under-resourced countries, for example, and also this mentor-mentee. It's like a training of trainers as well, as a methodology to further build the capacity of your participants. So yeah, did we miss anything in the discussion related to methodologies that you would like to add here? The recommendation arising from this discussion is the creation of the best practices compendium on the subject of virtual reality, and then the development of the toolkit with the decision trees or cheat sheets and EOVs that can help people identify entry points. I had Claudia, you have a feedback on this. I think I saw it, that it should be part of a course. If it's going to be hosted in OTGA, that it could be as part of a course or in repository. I think that that is what the discussion yesterday was actually touching on, whether OTGA can host this, whether as a training course or in the repository. Do you have comments on that, Claudia?
Well, my comment that was by email a couple of hours ago was mainly okay, perhaps because I couldn't be in the session yesterday. Is that a toolkit on its own as a standalone element may not make that much sense on Ocean Teacher. And therefore my comment that it would only make sense as part of a training event with defined learning outcomes. That was basically my comment.
And if it's not if it's not like a course, this can still be made available in OTGA and repository. Is that right?
No, if it's just a toolkit, I believe it would make more sense to be hosted on the OBPS repository of best practices.
I see. Okay, thank you. Well, if anyone wants to jump in the discussion, please feel free to do so at any time. Okay, next is the we had quite a huge part of the discussion on Monday session and also yesterday on OTGA. Claudia, would you like to just summarize the discussion on OTGA as a training platform for OBPS?
Okay, so I think pretty much everyone in this virtual room is already quite up to speed of what Ocean Teacher is. What the Ocean Teacher can provide or facilitate specifically for Ocean best practices is precisely hosting training courses and helping developing training courses following our workflow, our templates, which, as I mentioned last Monday, are ISO certified. So these courses could be made available through the Ocean Teacher platform. Yeah, following the Ocean Teacher methodology, and some best practices on how to organize training courses. And currently, given the limitations, specifically online, and eventually in a year or so, we can move on to blended learning and face-to-face training courses. But I don't know if there are any specific questions.
Well, so the recommendations that are related to the OTGA, as we discussed last Monday, one is this interface with the ethics working group, and yeah, they are interested in putting up a course on applied ethics in marine science in OTGA. And then the other one that was from the discussion yesterday is whether the courses in OTGA or there's a clear link to the protocols of OBPS. Is that available in at least in the OTGA tab of the OBPS website?
No, not yet. Well, or perhaps I didn't understand your question. Sorry, Joanna. Could you repeat?
So my understanding is, so the are there existing training courses related to OBPS in the OTGA platform right now?
Not yet.
Okay, so that's still to be developed.
Yes.
All right, because I think that the discussion yesterday was, at least for the early career ocean professionals, is for them to like understand which of the best practices link to their research needs. So if there is like guidance in that, then that's really going to be useful for them.
If I may add, I was looking at the notes from yesterday session, and I think I saw something on ECOPS requesting best practices on managing data. That's how I see it here. And in fact, this is not ocean best practices specific, and we've been doing this for many years now within the framework of IODE. So actually, training courses on data management, basic data management, research data management, are already available on Ocean Teacher. And in fact, and linking with Sophie and Pogo, we actually provide one module on ocean data management for the Pogo Center of Excellence with the AWI every year. So in fact, best practices in data management, ocean data management, there are already a number of courses available.
Yes, Yiming, I think Yiming?
Yes. Hi.
Yes, hi.
So I just got here from I was in the ethics working group again just now. So so I'm wondering. I'm just wondering. It's just a question. Is there some way that we could raise awareness on ethical aspects in his training courses or incorporate some curriculum in training courses? What do you think?
From my side, yes, it could be one topic, part of training courses. My first thought would be on data management to start with, but it could be others.
Yeah,
and we mentioned like while working with live animals, yeah, there should be ethics while doing so. So it's another topic that can be addressed as part of a training course.
Yeah, for example, some what mentioned in the working group just now, ethics working group just now, many scientists are not aware of what do you call it? So they still go to do sampling campaigns in EEZ. I don't remember the abbreviation, but so without permit. So because they don't know those regulations, those permits exist. So
may I jump in? So you mean in someone else's EEZ?
I don't know.
Well, I think that is mainly the issue, or that is the potential issue, but that is diplomatic, so it's yet another level, I believe. But perhaps somehow addressing the issue you're bringing in up. In fact, we've already also organized 3 editions of the training course on MSR, Marine Science Research, that also touches or is pretty much about international law for marine science research, what kind of documentation and requests have to be done, namely if you're going on like you're the PI on a research cruise that goes to international waters or to the EEZ of another country. So there's also resources in that regard, and this course was actually already organized last year in Europe and 2 years ago in Latin America, the Caribbean, and in Korea a good 3-4 years ago.
All right.
So those resources are also available, and if you want, I can send you the direct link to the course, which was organized on a face-to-face context, so the contents are not necessarily nicely well designed to be followed online, but it would be a good start, I guess.
All right. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Yiming. And is there any other question about the OTGA?
It's not so much a question, and it may not be directly about OTGA, but I just wanted to bring something up that was mentioned on the marine litter working group call yesterday. It was marine litter and citizen science, and there was some interesting discussion about how to educate the citizen scientists who are participating in things like beach cleanups and uploading their their data to, for example, using mobile apps. And someone mentioned, oh, this should be linked to the capacity development working group. So I just wanted to throw that into the mix and maybe see if Claudia has any thoughts about what if they've been thinking with OTGA about doing any training for the public.
Sorry, I am not really aware, and I was actually sending the link to Mingan, and I'm sorry, could you repeat?
Okay. It was something that came up in this Marine Litter Citizen Science Working Group session yesterday about actually linking to this working group in terms of providing training for citizen scientists. So kind of, I guess, at the same time, theoretical, education on the marine litter problem and etc., but also more practical training on, to make sure that the data are of good enough quality for whatever modeling or whatever purposes they're being used for. Mm-hmm. Is that something you've had any thoughts or discussions about?
No, not really. And I would say, and perhaps Peter Precisions can jump in here. This is more ocean literacy related.
Well, I guess and it may be relevant also for things other than marine litter, but more for the data, the data collection side of things. So in this case, we were talking about marine litter, but I guess in general, there's a potential issue with any citizen science regarding the quality of the data that people are submitting.
My first answer is we've never really dealt, we're working more with the research institutes, the National Oceanographic Data Centers, and it has never been our focus to train citizens to collect data. If that is going to change in the future, I cannot tell, I don't know. Could be considered.
Yeah.
But I can't really answer, I'm afraid.
No, it was just, I just wanted to mention it because it was mentioned yesterday and someone suggested, trying to link up with the capacity development working group. But I think it's an interesting question to think about.
Yes, but I think perhaps it would be interesting that this comes from the projects or the groups that are interested in using citizen collected data to make science with it. But I don't think it's on our top priority right now. I'm afraid.
Okay.
Well, I think Sophie's question on this citizen scientist on training related to data collection and the quality of data collected by public is quite related to our topic on engaging communities and practitioners and the in OBPS and our discussion on how it can reach, it can involve different stakeholders and other practitioners. I mean, other sectors such as indigenous communities, etc. And this part actually I think needs further discussion because either we run out of time in further delving into this issue, but I thought that it needs further discussion, because the question is what could be the process by which these groups can be brought into the process of creation and adoption of best practices, and putting it into the context of the decade, for example. I have a feeling that the majority of the OBPS community, at least as obvious in the poll that was run last Friday in the plenary, where I saw like just 1% social scientists in the group and 1% of the attendees or like policymaker, and the majority is really like data scientists and researchers. I think that the important question is the stakeholder engagement and the involvement of other communities of practice in the process, and that it didn't well, there were some interesting comments from the discussion, like involving government or national research institutions to do outreach, to co-design OBPs with other stakeholders and training them and providing training, or like how our OBPS colleagues can serve as a bridge for involving stakeholders and assisting them in developing best practices and submitting to OBPS. But this didn't really get much thought. I think, I mean, I think for this session, at least, we can explore on this topic more, like any thoughts on this, perhaps strategic directions that OBPS can take to address not only the needs of scientists but also communities and like coastal communities or coastal areas. What are your thoughts on this? Is that somehow related to that question, Sophie, that you raised earlier? Because I think that citizen science is more of like involving the public and
Yes, it is related. I think it's what you're suggesting is broader than the kind of technical training that that was being discussed in the Marine Litter Group. I think the idea there was very much, yeah, that giving specific protocols, and this is something that Jay has been writing to me about. So I guess either developing and making available protocols, whether they're written or videos or whatever, and or providing actual training sessions to groups of citizens, you know, on exactly how do you classify different types of plastic or whatever it is that they're doing. But I think, you know, there is also obviously the broader question of generally educating the public about the ocean and about ocean science. And that's something that was touched on in the plenary on Friday. And you know, there was a bit of discussion in the chat about you know, engaging with communications and ocean literacy groups of which there are quite a few globally and in different regions. I guess it's a question of how, how broad do we want to cast the net of OBPS, because resources are obviously limited. But Jay made a good suggestion about looking at what protocols are already out there for citizen science on different topics, and trying to get them collated and available through OBPS. I think that would be quite an easy win and a first step.
Yeah, well, I think Jay is here with us. Yeah, I can see Jay is in our group, so maybe you can. Are you there, Jay?
Yes, I am. Thank you. I've been looking at citizen science for probably a decade, and I was thinking about some of the work that was being done to characterize birds in this case, but it applies to marine litter. And I think what Sophie said is very interesting, because what happened there was, in order to make the citizen science work or whatever subject, a series of very careful protocols on how the work is done was established. And then they created training courses around those protocols. And from that, they got good quality data, because the issue was protocols to make sure that citizen science is in fact maintaining a quality standard. And I would add to what Sophie said, there are really two steps to that. One would be nice to document from marine litter any protocols within the best practices repository, and then draw on the people who created those protocols to support and design training courses. And I've seen that actually done, as I said, with birds and other environmental issues that were occurring along the coasts. So I just wanted to reemphasize linking the vision of the training with keeping the OBPS repository full, or having the content in there as a resource. Thank you.
Thank you, Jay. Thank you. Right, but aside from, I wonder if aside from yeah, the citizen science protocols that you're saying, if there has been, hello? Did I lose the connection? Hello? Okay.
Yeah, you're still.
Right, sorry. Like one of the recommendations, I think that came out from the discussion yesterday is on the best practices on stakeholder engagement. And I wonder if there are existing best practices on different stakeholders, on training different stakeholders in developing and disseminating the best practices.
I think certainly in the fisheries management sector, anything dealing with that sort of ocean data, there's a lot of best practices about co-design and engaging stakeholders. So I definitely think they're out there now. Whether they're, within the ocean observing community, maybe not as much. But I definitely think there are best practices out there for engaging stakeholders, especially around resource management issues.
Right. Well, I think this is also one of the challenge. Like there are like best practices existing like that, but how do we actually know what's existing? I mean, what best practices are there that would you know if that is in the OBPS, Alexis?
I don't know. I just know that, you know, there are, I used to work for a nonprofit called Rare that developed a lot of kind of training tools and best practices for stakeholder engagement. I know other large environmental NGOs like Conservation International or the Nature Conservancy do similar things, but I don't know if they're within the best practices system.
Right, because it would be like really a useful resource if those are in the yeah, registered in the OBPS. Related to this stakeholder engagement, I think that there is an interesting reflection, um, a short exchange with actually Jay and Peter on, for example, the roles of environmental NGOs as a way to involve the stakeholders in the ground, and there is a challenge about the reluctancy of national governments or government institutions to work with environmental NGOs in the sense that they um, they seem well, you know, all this insecurity about uh, structures and management issues in the government are usually they're usually sensitive about this. Perhaps Peter can touch on that issue, because I think that for stakeholder engagement, NGOs are potential like bridge to really work on the people on the ground, and so um, it's in um, their perspective on how scientists and non-scientific communities can co-design or co-create these practices, I think would be useful. Would you like to add something to that, Peter?
Well, maybe just explaining a little bit what was meant. Let's say environmental NGOs are often concerned with conservation of ecosystems,
Mm-hmm.
while government policy can have a bigger focus on, let's say, economic aspects. And so it's not always easy to bring those together. And sometimes governmental institutions are not really willing to share the information and data with those NGOs. In some cases, there are legal conflicts between NGOs and governments. So you have to be really careful in how you approach these issues. That's what I was trying to say.
I think another, you know, speaking from an environmental NGO, I think something that's very true, Peter, and there's often different priorities, but I also think that NGOs can be a bridge for scientists who really don't necessarily, they want to stay very, you know, within their scientific remit. NGOs have a little bit more ability to call meetings with policymakers and call meetings with stakeholders under an explicit, you know, conservation agenda or another type of agenda, whereas scientists might not feel comfortable doing that because it's not how they want to position themselves, or they really want to remain impartial. And so I think that's another role NGOs, at least a role that we play often, is calling meetings with governments and then bringing scientists to be experts. at those
Oh,
meetings.
yeah, I fully agree with that. Yes, it was just, I mean, I've seen enough NGOs where it works fine, where the NGO clearly has its role. But in some cases, in some countries, sometimes activism takes over.
Yeah. Well, aside from NGOs, I think that there is an interesting comment when we tried to gather some initial thoughts on the questions for this related to training and capacity development on using the OBPS community as a bridge, also to, you know, when they work with stakeholders um, in their projects, and they are familiar with best practices that well, they can assist these communities to develop best practices and submit it to OBPS. But I I would like to know, how do you imagine this process? How can we go through this process of linking the OBPS community to stakeholders on the ground?
I think they're just, you know, almost need an advertising campaign about OBPS. I'll be honest, I didn't even know about it for a long time, and I was working in this space of defining best practices for ocean science. And so I think the idea of a central repository is very, you know, compelling to a lot of people, and advertising that it exists and that it's available, I think, is important.
Yeah, if I can add to that,
Yes.
I think we really need to demonstrate how it can be useful for these stakeholders and these communities. I think at the moment, the repository is very much focused on science and data, and it's not something that anyone from outside the ocean science community would necessarily understand particularly well. So I think if we can start to get some best practices in there that are not so much focused on the science, but either on citizen science or on, I don't know, management or conservation issues, then those stakeholders might start to see the value and what it can do for them. So I think a combination of reaching out and advertising, but also making it more useful for those people would need to happen. And
Well,
just
yeah,
yeah,
yes,
sorry,
go
I just wanted to add that I've got another call at 4. I need to be in the partnership building session. So when you see me disappear, that will be why. So
No
sorry to
worries.
miss the end.
Right. No worries, Sophie. But just going back to your comment earlier, and I think that you described perfectly where the bottlenecks is. It's like, as you've said, there is the like data that's available, but I think that the problem is, yeah, the how to say, how do you actually translate data to knowledge and to use that to yeah, build the capacity of the public or of different stakeholders so that they would appreciate the use of this the use of this data. So that's I think a very important comment on how the current system is actually, how to say, yeah, more focused on needs of scientists. So maybe that's something that um, yeah, we can explore more on how we can make it more useful and beneficial to other non-scientific groups. Again, quite linking it to the decade of ocean science, I think that the objectives of the decade is not really just, scientifically informative objectives, but really more also on socially beneficial and relevant outcomes. Jay, you want to say something?
I do, thank you. I wanted to comment that, and following up on Johanna's comment, that it's not just the decade, but it's each of the SDGs. And if we can, and you can't do everything, so if we can target specific areas initially, I think that would be really, really nice. I just want to make one other comment. The outputs, the recommendations from each of the working groups will be taken quite seriously by the OBPS steering group. And so some of this discussion on whether we include citizen science or whether we broaden it to help NGOs, et cetera, we might consider that as a recommendation, a pointed recommendation, which then could be brought to the steering group for discussion. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Jay. We have some, let me go through the comments in the chat box. And yeah, Federico, you're saying some ocean literacy. We should explore a little bit more on that as a tool. Would you like to expound on that, Federico? Yes. Are you on mute? Oh, I'm sorry, Federico. Okay. I can't hear anything. I'm sorry. Just keep perhaps putting your comment in the chat box, and I'll just read it out for you if you're having some audio problems. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, but so basically, I think we've covered the highlights of the discussion in the last two sessions, and we have some time left for other questions that we haven't actually addressed in the first two sessions. This is the time to cover that. I was talking about earlier on how to link this training and capacity development working group to the decade, the objectives of the decade for ocean science. But as Jay has already said, it also should be like the link to the SDGs. And I think this is the chance for us to put really good recommendations to the OBPS group so that they can take it up in their meeting.
May I
yes, please, Claudia.
And perhaps I will open a can of worms, but perhaps this is actually very ocean best practices related, or best practices related in the sense of funding capacity development. What are the best practices? What are the experiences? And from a very my own experience, what is the decision process regarding who to be funded? It's something that we've been struggling for a few years. The resources will always be limited. And is it a good practice to fund everything? Namely when attending a a face-to-face training course? So I'm throwing this question to the room, and I would like to hear from what are the different experiences and perspectives.
Are you asking whether you think that those organizing meetings should be funding all of the participation? Is that what you were asking? Or are you asking more about how to
not
funding?
meetings, training courses.
Training
meetings
courses.
Yeah, that's one question, yes.
Yeah, we have had similar questions. I think that when I'm trying to ensure that there's like an end result of someone with equipment and conducting work, I build in funding for everything, for travel, for visas, for all that stuff. We did a broader training course, actually at one of the OTGA centers at Invamar in Colombia last year, where we basically had an application process to receive financial support and then made the registration very cheap so that really would just be the cost of travel if someone funded themselves. And we, I think that worked in terms of reaching a broader audience. But if your end goal is like kind of partners that are really invested, that maybe have the equipment and the resources, I've found that building that funding in for travel and for their participation is worthwhile. But if maybe you're just trying to do a bit more of an introductory course or something like that, then I don't think it's as necessary.
Okay, thanks. It's funny, you also mentioned something, tuition fees. Like in our case, Ocean Teacher does not use tuition fees. The training courses are for free. So my question was more, and as you had addressed the funding people to travel to attend the training course and supporting any costs while they are at the training course. I don't know if anyone else has other views or other inputs on the question of funding training. What are the models used?
I think another thing that we've done is require letters of support from the institutions for anyone to receive equipment that corresponds with the training, right? Because you want to make sure that someone receiving a significant investment has the support of their institution to be dedicating their time to this effort. And so that's another thing we've done, is required letters of support, you know, from the kind of administrative side of people's institutions to confirm that they will be able to dedicate, you know, their time to this project. That would be for any of the higher level of investment that we're giving. For just a participation in only the training and maybe not access to equipment, we haven't required that in the past.
Okay, thanks for your views. They do converge quite a lot with our approach up to now.
Yeah, but that's actually a very important question, Claudia, on funding. I think that well, that's usually the challenge in organizing training and, you know, training as much participants as you can. There's a question from Jay in the chat box on whether there has been a discussion on how subjects for courses are selected and how is the prioritization done. You mean prioritization for selecting participants or selecting courses, Jay?
Yeah, I'm talking about selecting courses. And I'll just add a comment that it's directly in relation to what we're just talking about. If a funding agency, a foundation, has certain subjects they're focused on, then we could develop courses for that and then get funding for it. or we can do bottom up. A science group needs some course, we'll do it, and then we'll worry about who can fund it. And so I was trying to mix the prioritization of course selections, that is subjects for courses, and how to deal with the funding of those courses.
Yes. Well, I think we had a discussion on this, but in the context of the OTGA, I think that Claudia provided an explanation on how courses are selected and put up in the OTGA. Is that right, Claudia?
Yes, but I can imagine that Jay's question is wider than that.
Yeah. Thank you, Claudia. I agree.
I think there's just an issue of a paucity of funding for capacity and training for ocean science. And so part of the challenge is there are groups that are, highly qualified to be designing training materials that are struggling to get funding. So I can't say that, one approach or another is going to be more successful in terms of raising funds. I think the approach that we've taken is this is our interest, this is our subject area expertise, and that is what we're designing training for. You could approach a funder and say, I know you're interested in this. Because the OBPS system is an established thing, you have, I guess, that authority, but I just feel like there are so many groups that are so well qualified and putting out really good work, competing for very limited funding. So I see a priority to just increase the overall amount of funding going into this kind of sector, which I mentioned it on the call that I was on. I'm a part of an effort that's trying to do this, trying to pool funding for ocean science capacity development. But that's just my perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Alexis. I'm glad that you're here because you're bringing in some perspectives from a funding organization. So that's really useful. I think we have a couple, less than 20 minutes left, and I would like to proceed with the discussion. At this time, we are in the recommendations part. I know that we have some recommendations in the here and there in the under each topic, but yeah, aside from these recommendations and the questions that we have discussed so far, is there anything else that we need to include in the highlights of discussion or recommendation we should make to the OBPS group?
This is probably captured in our discussion, but just more on the prospectus thing. I think that if we really just need more dedicated funding for this effort. And so, just offering that the Ocean Foundation collaboration with a lot of other people is attempting this to maybe tap into development banks and kind of large government-led funding programs like the Global Environment Facility to try and create a bit more of a pooled fund that people can access. So this is a big priority of mine that I'm putting a lot of energy into. So if that's of use to the community and something, you're welcome to be a part of that effort.
Yeah, thanks for that, Alexis. And I think that you've touched another important thing is like the collaborations that would arise from this effort and partnerships that we can tap perhaps to work around this challenges that we've identified in the discussions. Aside from you, I think that we also got a comment from Gabriel canonical. Is Gabrielle still here? Not sure. I think
No, she
he
had to
already
leave.
left.
Yeah.
Huh?
She had to leave.
Okay, all right. Yeah. Yeah, his comment is the MBUN. I have to check this. Is interested to work with this community to build on capacity exchange efforts. So maybe this is something that we should look into. And I know also, yeah, Alexis is working on this capacity development project. So yeah, any other thoughts?
Yeah, Johanna, I think we're slowly running out of participants. We're down to 11.
Oh yeah, I think that there's a what group is starting it, and I think there's another working group that's starting at this time. So they're kind of maybe hopping in and hopping on and off different working groups. So yeah, so yes, Peter.
Yeah, I was going to suggest, I think we've sort of beaten this to a pulp quite well. And looking at the 28 pages of the document so far, I think the time will now be to try and put it all a little bit into a summary and some bullet points, and maybe share those by email with the group we had today, the 20 something, sorry, the 17 people who participated today, and maybe the few who could not be with us today but were there on Monday. So you are prepared for Friday, because there's a lot of content here, and I think we need to summarize all that, and I don't think you can do that now in 5 minutes.
Oh yes, yeah, that's gonna be very difficult in 5 minutes. But yeah, so thank you, Peter. Maybe that's a good way to prepare for the plenary on Friday. Right. So what we're gonna do is to summarize this and circulate via email to everyone in the group, and perhaps you can go through it by tomorrow if there is anything that needs correction, or you want to add some more inputs and substantial thoughts in the summary. You're very much welcome, and we're going to prepare for that presentation, the group reporting on Friday. There's going to be 2 instances on Friday. Accommodating different time zones. So I'm proposing to open the floor to anyone who's interested to be a representative of the working group in the reporting and in the plenary. So if you would like to speak during the plenary, please let me know, and which instance, which time zone is going to work for you on Friday. I think given my timeline, it's 01:30 UTC. That's going to be convenient. Not really convenient, but yeah, it's going to work for my time zone. So I'll be in the 01:30 UTC session. So we're down to less than 10 minutes. So Peter, you have something to add? Or
No, I would suggest, I mean, I think we can close now, and then, like you say, send tomorrow or Thursday. What is it?
Right, tomorrow, Thursday.
Yeah. a summary if you can by email, and then people can maybe comment. You could put it on in a GDoc. That's probably the easiest, so people can make some comments. Yeah.
Right. Let's put it in the folder. Then I can just email with the link to that to our folder, so everyone can pitch in.
Okay.
All right. Thank you very much to all of you for joining us today, and we look forward to having you on Friday during the plenary. I think we can close now. Thank you. Bye. Oh, we forgot the picture. Can we have a group photo?
Well, it might be a bit unfair because there's only 9 of us left now. Or you mean this would be the group photo of the faithful?
Sorry?
Maybe you meant this would be a photograph of the faithful who stayed until the end?
Right.
Okay.
Like,
but you have to stop sharing your...
Who's taking the photo?
But you'll have to stop sharing your screen.
Sorry, yes. Okay, here. Yeah? Okay, it's okay now.
Have you taken the picture?
I did.
I think so. Okay, great. All right, thank you very much, everyone. Good night. Bye.
Bye, thank you. Good night.